Well, hello, Thomas. How are you?
Well, good, Neil. Thank you very much. You had some technical issues trying to get on today, but I'm
I'm
glad you could.
fighting with Google. It was a
Well,
bit
that's
complex.
supposed to do that.
Yeah, I seem to have won. Everything seems to be here now.
Yeah.
So we're back online.
I'm just looking at myself with this scarf. I look like a rabbi.
A rabbi.
Meg, Megaliths.
Good morning already.
I Taro.
Oh, that's good. Well, I get a bit Hebrew, don't I, with my cards, so that's quite appropriate, I think, really.
Okie doke.
Yeah,
So interesting developments in the Isle of Man this week, I believe.
yes, my beloved old man. They just decided open up everything. Everything's fantastic. And that is a really good move. That's sort of really good move. So it really lightens the load a bit, doesn't it? To know that we are getting on with this sort of thing. We can't still go, unfortunately, but everything on the island. No nappies, no distancing. Everything's open. Walk up to the bar, buy a drink. The whole works. They
What's the
said
story with? What's the story with there?
to visit, they've got four. They're on level 4 border restrictions, which means the whole border's closed and you can't go in, you can't go out unless you're returning. Then you've got to isolate. So they've got to come down to level 1. But the other ones are little intermediary things anyway. Well, the chief politician, I can't really call him now, on the Isle of Man was saying the other day, by the end of April, he hopes, at the beginning of May, he hopes to be able to lift the border restriction and everything. So then we can go, hopefully.
They will boom tourist wise because everybody in Ireland and UK is going to want to go there.
Absolutely. There's been I wrote about it in my book as well. There's been a fight for many, many years on the Isle of Man between the banking fraternity and the leisure fraternity, the holiday industry, because the bankers basically want the island to themselves as a tax haven, and the tourist industry want to open up. So this has really been a bit of a boom for the banking side, because they've had the island all the way to themselves. But obviously now they're going to have to open up because the rest of the island, I'm assuming the TTs, I think the TTs at the end of May or something, we're beginning of June. So and most of the inhabitants of the island get paid pretty much all their income in those 2 weeks of the TT. So
Yeah,
they need to be going.
the island was extremely poor
Mm.
until TT. It was one of the poorest places in Europe. Now it's like full of millionaires and everything.
Oh yeah, it's you're gonna have a strange and it's open top. Rolls Royce is just next to an old banger, It's like the guy just comes in and sits in the cafe next to you, and it's that sort of place. It's fantastic. I love it. It really is.
I haven't been since I was a kid, but I know it's loaded with interesting megaliths and loads of Viking stuff too.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I've just shifted my tour across to May, from April to make sure we can go. So I've been working on my tour timetable, and pretty much it's already up there now. So fingers crossed. I don't want to end up like last year, just crossing everything off as you went through the year and refunding Oh, can't do another year like that.
Yeah, no, it's but there seems to be a growing anger here now among people I didn't think would get angry. Of
Mm,
course, there's the idiots who worship the government and always will. But I've noticed, like, whenever there's a politician makes a statement, the media, the comments on the newspaper or whatever, mostly am attacking them. Like, we've had enough, open up, this kind of thing. Because it's a dictatorship at this point, really. You know, and
absolutely is. Yeah.
it's they can only get away with terrorizing people for so long, and there are people who love being terrorized. They absolutely love it, but at the end of the day, I foresee something like, if they don't end it themselves, I foresee something like say a city or a towns declaring themselves back in business and ignoring it. And if that can take off, and then another town does it, the end of there, that's the end of the politicians and the civil servants.
Yeah, it just takes it to get to grasp hold, doesn't it? Well, they did it in 50,000 restaurants in Italy opened up, which is quite amazing, and the riots over in the Netherlands, which I thought I'd never see. So
people standing on the Berlin Wall brought down the Eastern Bloc. And
absolutely, it did, yeah.
It just says enough.
Yeah, because we've got a bit of a communist theme going through today. I think there are talk or some of it, but yeah, I mean, we're definitely in that situation now, and it's got to end. I seem to be doing the yellow thing again. I don't know why, because
the light balance on your you can adjust the light balance there. That's better. You're gone now. You're okay for a second. You're a Simpsons character again.
Yeah, I've got old Homer again, haven't I? Don't.
Yeah.
As long as I don't do Granddad and fall asleep.
Oh, but we're all turning into Granddad now because we're all like.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Oh yeah, I can fall asleep mid sentence with as good as anybody now. We're watching Netflix, you know.
There's that one in The Simpsons where Grandpa says, "I got in the media once," and he shows the newspaper, and it says, "Old man shouts at cloud." And we're all like that.
Yeah. We're all like that. Well, just about that nuts, aren't we? Yeah, just about that crazy. Can't go on much further. They're still doing the cognitive dissonance thing, I think. So 1 minute it's, we're all going to open up. It's all fantastic. But there's another wave come from Mexico or South Africa, so we might not be able to. And then we are, then we're not. There's been this cognitive dissonance thing all the way through, hasn't it? And that's what's created the fear. So hopefully we're getting to the end of that. Because I can't see people now in the UK, in England anyway. I don't know about the Scotland and Wales and things, but after they've been promised so much, just for them to turn around and say, "Actually, we've changed our minds now." I think that's scratched people's patience.
Also, watching Boris from this side of the Irish Sea, Boris Johnson, he's starting to look insane or something. He doesn't look. I think he is.
Yeah.
The more camera he looks.
Yeah, it's very difficult to understand how he's managed to. He's obviously sold out, and now I think he must be terrified. And I just think that the only way he can get out of this now is to make this rollout of the old serum. Well, that was weird. Old change to make that work, because he's not going to get another opportunity to get out. I don't think.
No, he wants that to be his legacy. The one who, but he looks desperate. He's just changed in every way.
Oh yeah.
It's almost like he's been.
Yeah, he's been. He's been co-opted, definitely, by the technocrats. But what he's done is, I think he's relied on them as his excuse all the way through. He said, "Well, I'm not going to make a decision because this guy here is making the decision." And the trouble is, they now are making the decisions. So, and it's kind of cut him out of the picture. Anyway, I just wish they'd get rid of him and get rid of the other guy stood next to him and the two other guys stood at the back and get some new people in. People that haven't really bought into it, We shall see. We shall see.
So today's tarot card, this is on your channel today, so you kick off.
Yeah.
Number 5, the Hieraphant.
Yeah.
Or the Pope.
Yeah, whichever way we want to look at it. Yeah. This is on. So we're going backwards and forwards, aren't we? So this particular episode, which is number 9, isn't it? Yeah, episode number 9. This is going on my channel, Neil McDonald's Megalithic Tours, and you'll copy it onto your playlist. So please, if you subscribe on both, and you'll get them bouncing backwards and forwards like that. So yeah, the Hieraphant, which I'll put here as my picture. But here it is anyway. That's my card. That's the Rider-Waite. Two very, very similar again. So what does our Hieraphant mean? Well, he's intuition, or inner teaching, or inner tuition, intuition. The Hieraphant himself was the teacher in the Greek Eleusinian mystery schools, and that's who we've got, and that sort of tells you that these teachings go right the way back to the Essenes, and way back further than that as the ancient mysteries. So he is the revealer of the mysteries, revealer of the your intuition, your inner teaching. Now, I've got a letter, as always, and the letter is in the corner. I keep holding it up, but it's here anyway, isn't it? But it's the letter Vav, and Vav is hook, or it can be nail. It's basically something to add on, something to join things together. So it's joining, and then so with that you've got the outer and the inner. So the outer is like joining things onto the thoughts that we've put into the Emperor, because it's a series that carries on, and also it's the inner voice. So it's the outer and the outer of the inner of joining. Hopefully that'll become a little more clear what I mean. So looking at a bit of the symbolism, I'll just look at a bit of it because there's so much on the card. It's quite a complicated card. So I'll go through like the main bits, but if you want the rest of it, it's on my series on my site, the tarot series. Just go to number 5. I'll put a little link to it at the end. You can click on it. So the pillars, right? We'll start. First, you've got 2 pillars, one at each side. So those are obviously the same pillars as you had in the High Priestess, that were black and white. They were the pillars from the Solomon's Temple, and there were the pillars on the Kabbalistic tree. They were black and white on the High Priestess, but now they're grey. And the reason for that is if you mix black and white together, you end up with grey, and grey is wisdom. That's why Tolkien chose grey for Gandalf the Grey. And the whole of the background is grey. So that's saying they're bringing together the 2 polars into the chair, into his throne, which is also grey. So that's ended up being the middle pillar. So it's basically, we're talking about wisdom. So the guy is a man of wisdom, which he would be if he was the Hieraphant. And in some cards, it's the Pope, but that's a different story. I think Thomas will talk a bit about that. On the corner of the seat, you see there's some horned objects. So those represents Taurus. That's the bull, and he's got a crown. Now his crown is like egg shaped, so that's the cosmic egg. So that's taking you right back to the beginning to the Fool. We're saying that the all power that we said was the Fool, the super consciousness, is what he's crowned with. So every little bit of the journey is incorporated into our Hierophant. He's got 3 trefoils on his crown, and these represent the elements and the chakras. The different amounts of on each one represents that. We say if you want to see more detail about that, look on my tarot series. He has a big staff. Staffs always mean dominion, so he's got dominion over all these things. And the top little bars on his dominion pole represent the Tetragrammaton, which is that holy name of God, which represents the whole of everything again. So it's the Fool again with the cosmic egg, the whole of everything. It also represents, as the Tetragrammaton does, all the elements, the 4 levels of creation, which is like formative and up to creative and material, and of course all the implements that were on the magician's table, like the sword and the pentagram and the cup and the one that's left, the wand. He has a scarf, but this scarf here, you'll see, is behind his ears. So maybe it's with that saying that it's representing inner hearing, and he's only got one ear showing. So that says that it is inner hearing, and we only ever understand half of what we're being told anyway from the mysteries. Lots of equal armed crosses around. In fact, there are 10. So, and the equal armed cross is the original cross, which represents, again, just like Grey, the coming together of all the opposites. He's got one on each hand. He's got one on each foot, 2 on the keys, and then on the dais, or the thing he stood on there, he's got, they call it the reverse Venus, which is like, so if you imagine the circle going in on itself, you end up with another cross. So that's involving Venus quite slyly in there. There's got 2 keys that's to unlock the mysteries. So what it all means in a nutshell is that it's answering the answers from the Empress. Remember what we had was, we started with the Fool, where it was just super consciousness still waiting to go on a journey. You had the Magician who thought about his journey of cosmic journey he wanted to go on. So he drew down power from the super consciousness through his self-consciousness into the High Priestess, which was subconsciousness, and the subconscious ideas there worked through the spiral Torah of the High Priestess. She came up with some answers. They fed through to the Empress, and the Empress was pregnant there with all sorts of ideas and possibilities. Answers to the Magician's questions, and she was nature as well. She was producing results. So and then you took all those results and you passed them through the Emperor, which was sound, God-given reason, which is where a lot of people miss out. But you can either say, okay, that solved it, or you can say, well, I need some more help. So that if you want a bit more help to carry on the process, that's when you consult the Hierophant. And the Hierophant is said to be the inner voice. You would listen very patiently, quietly to the inner voice that comes out. And it comes out in a particular way. It's always as the production of a law, an actual, not it won't be go and do this, go and do that. It will be an understanding of the actual law that governs the whole of your problems. You'll never have to worry about it again because you've got the basis of it. You've grasped it, which is the Wheel of Fortune, actually. So that is my interpretation of our Hierophant. I think it's very important because to build up your wisdom and your intuition is vital part of existing on this plane here. So over to you, Thomas, for your bit.
Well, that's very part about Gandalf the Grey. That was very interesting. I never thought of it.
Yeah, because then Gandalf goes white, doesn't he, later on? Because then he's gone up to the top Sephra, which is white, which is the crown. Anyway, yeah, sorry, your turn.
Yeah, until recently, this card was mostly known as the Pope, Il Papa, in the classic Italian deck. Now, this is the first card that has a kind of a controversial history to it, or there's a theory that in the earliest Tarotto decks in Italy from the Middle Ages, there is no Pope appearing. And this is because of controversies at the time where the papacy had been moved from Rome to Avignon. And there was discrepancies on who actually was the real Pope. There's also a very interesting concept that the original deck had someone else other than the Pope, and perhaps, as you suggested earlier on, an ancient priest from the classical pagan world, from the mystery schools, from maybe a high priest at the Temple of Apollo, the Temple of Jupiter, depending on if it's Greek or Roman. But there's also another very interesting history that the original illustration for this was based on Pope Innocent III, who we know, of course, from the Albigensian Crusade, a very controversial Pope, a very powerful Pope. He was sort of like a mixture of Pol Pot, Henry Kissinger, and I don't know, an intellectual at the same time. He was determined under any, whatever it took to copper fasten and hold the papacy as a power force in Europe. By the time he died, he had basically had all the kings of Europe, including powerful ones like Frederick II, under his command. So he was a formidable person, and this is what the card represents. What Carl Jung called the senex, which is when a male has his individuation moment and rounds out his life. He's a mixture of spiritual, materialistic, success, power, emotions, stoicness. There's a mixture of both the Epicurean and the Stoic within him. He represents the transmutation of ideas from the material world. So we're back to another esoteric concept of a transformer who brings the spiritual ideas into the real world, but in a very practical way. He's an organizer. He represents power. He represents conformity, orthodoxy, good and bad. In the negative, of course, he's a tyrant. In the positive, he's like a wisdom, a force of wisdom. He also, in the negative, represents the possibility of gaining power through espionage and court playing, a kind of a Machiavellian in an extreme negative sense, Macbeth kind of character. And this is why in this card, one of his bishops, cardinals, is looking back at the reader saying, who is this guy? How did he get his power? So he's always going to carry that with him, because he'll always be the subject of jealousy of ones who are not sitting on the papal throne, which is often, like we saw it with like a Trump and stuff like that. A lot of the people who disliked him were basically jealous of him and his successes in life. So weak men, spineless men will be down here constantly trying to disparage of the Pope or the Hierophant. He represents orthodoxy in all its forms. So he could be a cold, hard tyrant that doesn't compromise, or he can be someone whose laws are genuinely based on good. But he goes by the rule of the book, and his shepherd's crook, which is originally a pagan thing of the Druids, is about he's the shepherd of the flock, the organizer of the people. He, again, in the pagan or heathen otherworld deck, he's shown more akin to a druid. There's his two columns or two megaliths behind him. He's standing there with his crown representing his connection to higher forces. He has a very basic triune similar to the Hindu god Shiva, which is hinting at the Indo-European aspects of European paganism. And also he's a classic druid. Now, a druid is nothing like what we're told druids are in like neo-paganism and kind of Victorian romances. The druids were very much organizers, and they were the almost like the living library of the tribe. They were very involved in genealogies, the execution of law, and so on. Magic, yes, and divination was part of their brief, but it wasn't the central part of it. The druid was seen as the ultimate scholar, what every young man aspired to. This is why Julius Caesar was fascinated by them. He said that the druids were followed around by young men who sought great wisdom from them. And we see that in many religions as well, the concept of following around the great thinker, and not fawning over him, but genuinely wanting wisdom. And that was the druid was very much like that in the pagan world. And especially things like, and when they talk about, they used, there's a lot of nonsense out there. When they used magic, what their oracles was to do things like drink bull blood and fall asleep under a tree. And then their dreams would give them the answers to problems. Very interesting, because we often go to bed with problems on our minds. And then I'm quite upset about it. And in the morning we wake up and there's a sudden solution to how to get out of it, and it doesn't seem so bad. Well, the druids actually brought that into an oracle. They actually used it as an oracle, as sleep and dreamings as a way of solving problems. But he's shown in the same guise again. He has the hand of benediction, which you see in everything. The right hand raised in the papacy, or it's often shown like this kind of a thing. And if you create a shadow, you get a horned devil for the negative, or you get like the sign of benediction, malediction. Ephraim Levi had a big thing about that. And so he represents law, through spiritual guidance and the holding together of tradition and the holding together of power through wisdom. But he'll always be subject to jealous people thinking that he got his power through, espionage and spying and Machiavellian things. Could be true in some cases, could not be, but he's often blinded by his mission. We could sit there and say Pope Innocent III was an incredibly evil man, but in his mind, he believed he was doing the work of Christ because he was basically had been traumatized by the fall of Jerusalem to the Muslims, and he believed that that was a punishment by God upon the papacy and European Christianity, and his job was to make that right. And of course, he did terrible things like the Albigensian Crusade, but it was like the kind of like autocratic communist leader. It's very easy to portray them as kind of a kind of an evil monster, a kind of this kind of thing. But when in reality, when people who knew them and spoke to them said they were just kind of ordinary, very orthodox people. So that's the Pope. The Pope is a warning, is a warning of not falling into orthodoxy too strongly and to be flexible. But it's also the virtue of maintaining order and the development of the male as he reaches his senex and completes his individuation of life, as Jung tells us. That's my theory.
Brilliant, yeah. I like the idea of the druid sleeping and waiting for that inner voice, because that sort of carries across the mind, doesn't it? Which was the whole inner tuition thing again, waiting for the voice to pop into your mind. So yeah, they do cross over, don't they? Interesting.
Well, and you see another, like I was joking earlier on about the rabbi, but it's funny, there's a synchronicity. Like in the Orthodox rabbis, they will often have the younger rabbis following them around saying, the chief rabbi, what does this mean? What does that mean? It's shown actually at the beginning of that wonderful musical Fiddler on the Roof, where the young men say to the rabbi, is there a special prayer for the Tsar? And he goes, yes, there is. Let's hope he stays well away from us. And so it was like, it was he represents that kind of wisdom.
In the Gnostic, the dualistic religions, that like the Cathars and the Bogomils and Mate, they always had the perfect or the leader, and they always had the learner. There was always two of them together. There was the teacher and the learner always following it, and then eventually the learner would become the teacher, and he would have a disciple following him around. So I suppose it's the same sort of idea, really. It makes sense, doesn't it? Really, to me.
Yeah, it's the Hieraphant or the Pope or whatever that archetype represents. It runs through all the Christian religions, through everything. They are the Brahmins of India. It's everywhere. The older man who gives guidance. So the juxtaposition with the Empress is very much there, and also the High Priestess. And so we've now reached a stage in a tarot where we've kind of assimilated the male and female dominance.
Yeah.
Now we move into the complexities of that, where we have the anima and the animus, and from this point on, in many ways, it becomes we've established male, female attributes, failings, and for the rest of the major arcana, those two forces sort of play against each other through things such as the Chariot, the Lovers, the Devil card, the Wheel of Fortune when it strikes midnight. So it's he's sort of like the opening now to the big show. Remember when I said last week, the tarot for me, the major arcana, really gets interesting after card number 5, the Hierophant.
Yeah, because you've got the male and the female. You've got every single opposite showing again in the grey. The very fact now we've not got the black and the white anymore. We've got the grey. So the both opposite, the male and female, and every other opposite has now come together.
And of course, the relationship of 5 to the pentagram. This is very important. We now have, motion, but also motion in 3 dimensions that we've carried off from the hexagram. And so therefore we have the five points of the human being, the 5 seeds in the apple. It's really, it's just the tarot is just a magnificent thing.
Oh,
You couldn't make
fantastic!
it.
Yeah, I mean, you can go in. There's so many different levels that you can go into it at, and then you go further and further and further. I mean, you talk about the five, yeah. You've got the levels on the his bar, his stuff of Dominion, but there it says that there are really, so there are four levels of the tetragrammaton, which so it creates a square. But if you add one more level, shin, which is so you got yod he vev he, you put yod he shin vev he, you end up with five. And that's what we're saying here. There's an extra one, and then so you end up with a pentagram.
Yep.
So you can go further and further and further in all the time.
That's interesting because there's a funny synchronicity there as well. The Isle of Man is a place where they say if you stand on top of Snaefell, the mountain at the top, you can see five kingdoms: England, Ireland, Wales, and the Kingdom of Heaven. So that's very, it's a very interesting concept too, that the five shows up like that.
Yeah, it's really it's like more or less equally distant, not far from all these different, from Anglesey, from the Lake District, from Finhorn, is it, and from Ireland. So it's fantastic. Yeah. So we decided on a movie as well, haven't we? And
from autocratic rule,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Isle of Man. Yeah, we could talk about the Isle of Man for all day, me, because I love it so much, and I just can't wait to get back there. I really can't. Seeing the picture of them being filmed in the pub, saying, "What's it like being in a pub?" Oh, it's great. I like to come for a pint, and everybody's like, I recognise the pub, and I recognise the streets they're walking down. Oh, I should be there. Sorry, I missed that bit. Go on.
I said someone somewhere has to lead the way. It might as well be them.
Yeah, let's just hope that. Oh God, yeah. I mean, I think we will. I'm pretty sure now that things are going to be sorted out. Famous last words, I suppose. But there you go. So it was your choice, wasn't it?
The movie is Dr. Zhivago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason why you had picked The Wizard of Oz, but I don't like The Wizard of Oz. I didn't like.
The funny thing is, I don't really. It's just that there's a connection with the banking system, which is kind of that's why it was written.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah,
but yeah, well, it's a silly film, isn't it?
I don't think Julie Garland had a very good singing voice, and I find it quite. I mean, I know back in the day it was a big deal and everything, the way it changed from black and white to color, but it just does nothing for me. But then I suggested what we're going to talk about today is the movie Dr. Zhivago.
Mm-hmm.
Still one of the highest grossing movies of all time, even though it was made in 1965. And basically what Dr. Zhivago tells is an epic story of the Russian Revolution from the period of World War One, just before World War One, all the way up until the Stalinist period. And it's told through the story of people, ordinary, they're basically middle-class people, and their lives through this period. Now, Dr. Zhivago played fantastically by Omar Sharif. It's a David Lean film who also made Lawrence of Arabia. So it has that big, sweeping, glorious.
Oh, yeah.
They couldn't film it in Russia, or the Soviet Union as it was then, for obvious reasons. So they filmed it in Spain. They made very good use of the central area of Spain and those vast landscapes, and the Pyrenees as well, to simulate the Ural Mountains. So it's very plausible and authentic visually as well. But even though it was filmed in a very different country, but then Spain is a very diverse landscape. But the film basically talks about this young medical student called Dr. Zhivago, who's an idealistic, kind young man who's really not really interested in anything else other than, becoming a graduate and helping people as a doctor. And then his brother, World War One breaks out, and that's what changes everything. His brother, who's a committed communist, goes off to the front to fight the Germans, but he's done in there as a fifth columnist, an agent. His job is to cause a revolt among the Russian troops. Then that will be the revolution to come back to Russia, which happens 4 years later, which surprises him. Yeah, that was played fantastic. The character his brother played fantastically by Alec Guinness. And at the same time too, Julie Christie plays this young girl who's sort of like a seamstress in a fashion design house in Moscow, and she's being wooed by this sort of character who represents a kind of bourgeoisie class of Russia, and especially the ones who survived the revolution because they kind of like adapted. They, even they didn't face the firing squads because they were kind of like the Pope. And he's not a particularly nice character, but he's also a good character. He's like a dualistic character. He does rape Julie Christie at one point, but also at the end he kind of redeems himself after going through like his own, by trying to rescue them basically. And so Omar Sharif is Dr. Zhivago, on his engagement to for it's very, very complicated. Basically, he witnesses a massacre by the Cossacks upon a communist group led by a guy called Pasha, who is played brilliantly by Tom Courtney, the English actor, and he gets hit with a saber. Now he's Julie Christie's fiance, or married, I think, actually, and something changes him. He has a psychic breakdown and becomes cold and hard. And even though early on in the film he talks about he doesn't like the Bolsheviks because they don't know right from wrong, he ends up kind of transforming into the worst kind of a Bolshevik during the Russian Civil War. And their lives constantly meet and pass. And you get a very good insight into how that thing would have affected middle-class people. Like Dr. Zhivago himself, his life, he goes through horrible things. He's basically deported to Siberia, or gets his transport papers out there. His home is taken away by the Bolsheviks. And like we hear this now, you will own nothing, the Great Reset. This is what and he comes home one day and his nice house in Moscow is now, the communists have given all the rooms as apartments to different families. There's now a commune. And he plays along with all this, but his brother is able to, who's high up in the police in the communists, is able to help him to get through as many situations as possible. So it's really about Dr. Zhivago's brother's story, because it kind of ends with him lamenting the sadness of what happened to his own family. And he's trying to figure out if this girl who works at the power station is actually his real niece. And at the end, he has this beautiful moment where he asks her, do you play the balalaika? And her boyfriend goes, he's a genius. And he goes, young man, what do you do? And she goes, he works that, pointing to the new power. Beautiful. It's a very touching scene, but it shows like what took Russia to that point. But they, it's just, and when it talks about the Russian soul in terms of poetry and literature, and how no matter what, the artist carried through. That was the ultimate message of the film. That it's like Terence McKenna says, if the artist can't find a way, it can't be found. And that's really what, and even his brother, who's like a hardened communist policeman, has to admit at the end that that throughout, even with Bolshevik and Stalin and all the horrors that that won't tell what happened to Julie, but the people disappearing into the labor camp system, that he understands it in the end. He has a moment of epiphany that the artist, the amount of people that came to his brother's funeral and stuff like that, as the poet, and how that really kept the Russian soul alive through communism. And I think it's a beautiful film. It's beautifully made. David Lean, it just has that, he made Lawrence of Arabia and Ryan's Daughter, which are just sweeping epics, and I highly recommend Dr. Zhivago. And it got criticized at the time because it's not Solzhenitsyn in that it plays down, it doesn't show the full horrors of the Russian Revolution and the rise of the Bolsheviks and towards Stalinism. But remember, it had to tell it to an audience in the best way it could. So it told it through the eyes of a kind of a romantic story, or a romantic problems, or romantic happenstances. But I absolutely love Dr. Zhivago. I think Omar Sharif, one of the reasons I think Omar Sharif played that part so well is he was actually a rebel himself. He fought against the British in the Aden crisis. He was an Egyptian kind of insurgent. So he had battle experience himself in real life. And it's just a wonderful film. Highly recommended. And did you like it when I recommended it to you?
Well, I did, yeah. I mean, I'd seen it years and years ago, so I didn't really remember what it was about. So I hired it and I watched it through twice. And that's a long time because it's 3 hours 20 minutes, isn't it? That's a long film. But absolutely loved it. Yeah, really, really did. It was. I mean, on the surface, it's a love film, isn't it? That's the surface level. And Laura, that absolutely stunningly beautiful Laura with the eyes. You know, that's the thing that, and everybody falls in love with her through the film, which is kind of understandable. So, so that's the first thing you think, and the first half of the film is, it's like you say, it's the bourgeoisie. It's kind of decadence, but it's city life, isn't it?
Yeah,
A city life. But,
they're
hmm?
more upper middle class. They're more middle class, upper
Yeah,
middle class
yeah.
than well, they wouldn't even be just well off middle class. They weren't
They
aristocrats.
weren't royalty. No, they were just people just living the city life, going to the opera. That horrible Victor guy who said it eventually sort of redeemed himself, but he was a nasty piece of work to start. But he was just on his. He just went to the gentleman's club and that sort of thing. That's what they were, wasn't it? So that was the first half, and it totally contrasted the second half, which was just bland snow everywhere, and that kind of shows the difference between the normal life that people live and after communism.
Yeah,
Because I think in the book it was very much more about communism than the film. You know, and I was reading that at the time that the book came out, which was when it was about the middle 1950s. I think it was then. Then they couldn't write the book, or they wrote it in Italy, but they had to smuggle it out in Russia. They had to smuggle it out, but it wasn't. They wasn't allowed to be open in Russia. So what they would do, they made very, very small books of it. And when Russian people came over for whatever for tourist reasons, they were watched by the KGB all the time. Well, people would pass these books to them, saying, "Take these back to Russia and pass them around," because the whole communism thing, it's a blight, isn't it? And I kind of I can see a connection now. I found some cuttings from the book from the Gulag Archipelago, where because I tried to read this is Alexandra Solzhenitsyn. I tried to read it a few years ago, and I got well that far in where the bookmark is, and I couldn't go any further because the horrors of communism were so much I couldn't take it.
that's why I reject. That's why I reject the criticism of Doctor Zhivago. That was the best way to tell it through the story of ordinary people's lives without having to show too much of the viciousness and so on. For me, the scene where they're on the train in the wagon going from Moscow
Oh
to
God, yeah,
Siberia, that's like a movie within a movie itself. But there's one very touching scene in that there's an anarchist who's
yeah.
now been an enemy of the revolution, and he's going to be transported. He's on his way to being transported to a labor camp in Siberia, like in Solzhenitsyn's archipelago. And he looks down at an elderly couple who are peasants and poor. They're an old man and woman, but they're hugging and kissing each other as they go to sleep.
Mhm.
And he's just looking down, knowing that he probably won't come back from the labor camp alive, knowing that he'll never find love like that. And it's just such one of those powerful little scenes that there's no dialogue involved, and the film is full of these little scenes where you see
Yeah, little sort of cameo
this is
things.
the
Yeah.
primary horror of the communists and communism, and I would even rank things like socialism and the Great Reset into this. Is
Oh,
that
definitely, 100%,
this
100%.
card
The line is there. It's a thick rope joining them together. Same thing.
because cold-hearted psychopaths adore these systems.
Yeah.
They relate to the average feelings of the ordinary person, and that's what the anarchist looking at the elderly couple in the train car represented. That this was a man who says, "I'll never find love. I'll probably die in the labor camp," and that was horrible, that, but it was not done in a way to shock you. It was done in a way that, like, you would, that you'd have to have it in here to know what that scene meant,
Yeah,
and not
absolutely. Yeah.
that was about. And that's what that was his most damning thing of the communist thing. And you see that with Pasha when he becomes into Stranglikov, I think his name becomes later. He becomes he transforms into a proto psychopath, a decent, honorable young student, and then he gets hit with the sword, the saber, by the Cossack, and he literally transforms slowly into this monster, this genocidal monster of the Bolsheviks. And that line where he becomes like, you hear the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. They say things like, "You will own nothing." Well, what does he? The private life is dead. The private life.
I just scribbled something down just before about exactly the same thing. It's somewhere just exactly what you said. You will own nothing. There's a little film, isn't there, that from Klaus Schwab? I think I thought wrote Schwab, and he said, didn't he? There's a little film from the reset saying, "Yeah, I own nothing, and I've never been happier." No, that is exactly the same. But it's that ideology, isn't it? It's always an ideology. They come at you with, "It's good for you." I'll just read this bit from the.
As Bill Gates says, you won't have a choice.
Oh yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah.
With the lockdown. And another interesting side to this is that in many totalitarian revolutions, whether they be the Maoist, the Khmer Rouge, or the communist or the Third Reich, they often show the idealistic youth as a young girl with pigtails, kind of on the cusp of puberty, but not in puberty.
That was the Nazi thing as well.
Yeah, and Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg is front and center on the World Economic Forum's documents. She is the archetype the Nazis and the Bolsheviks used. It's always a young girl who's devoted to the state, and instead of this is what Greta Thunberg is. And I want people to remember this. She represents the archetype used by totalitarian forces.
That's right. Perfect.
As the young girl who doesn't grow up and have a boyfriend and fall in love and have a family. She is the young girl who falls in love with the state, with the dogma, with the politician, and therefore she forgoes this concept of having boyfriends, getting married, having children, and being a traditional woman. She's now married to Chairman Mao, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Pol Pot, and now Klaus Schwab. And people have to understand just now, I'm not saying she's particularly involved in this because she's obviously not very intelligent, but she's being used by these monsters for the same purpose, to tap into your archetypal core that they did with the same playbook of the totalitarians in the past.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, 100%, definitely. And they brought her out recently, and this is where I think things went a little bit wrong for them, because they thought they used her as their ace card, bringing her out, and they thought that people were going to be taken in by her. But everybody seemed to go, "We're not interested in that," and I think that's what made them go one step further. That's what it seemed to me. Anyway, I'll read this little thing about ideology, because to get an idea of what Solzhenitsyn said. He's from the Gulag Archipelago. Ideology is what gives evil doing its long-sought justification and gives the evildoer the necessary steadfastness and determination. That is the social theory which helps to make his acts seem good instead of bad in his own and others' eyes, so that he won't bear reproach and curses, but will receive praise and honours. Thanks to ideology, the 20th century was fated to experience evildoing on a scale calculated in the millions, which are millions of death. These cannot be denied, nor passed over, nor suppressed. And I honestly think that the hundreds of thousands of deaths that came from this ideology is exactly, not nearly or a little bit, is exactly what we're experiencing right now. It's just a further on down the line after Greta.
Well, it's the whole thing of utopias. The utopia is based on on idealism. The utopia is based on the belief that a perfect, infallible world is possible, society is possible. And the people who attach themselves to it are generally people who've never had any hardship in their lives. And therefore,
Absolutely. Yeah.
the rest of us don't play along. Or they're students who are stupid and they're still in college and stuff like that. They have no world experience.
Yeah.
But if the rest of us play along, any means necessary to create this utopia then fills the void of the PR. So what you see on the World Economic Forum about the Great Reset now, that is the precursor to mass graves, gulags, and
Yeah.
we already have detention centers for the fucking for the we have the deputy prime minister here, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, openly smirking on TV last week, talking about detention centers. And the national broadcaster here had a story of a little Irish girl, which he probably made up out of the blue, held in a detention center, I think it was in Vietnam or Singapore. And she goes, everyone was so nice and it was so much fun.
Yeah, yeah. God.
I know the people who watch this kind of program are awake, but Pete, you've got to you've got to understand it's one thing, people have done great work exposing the Great Reset for what it is, but people have to, in fact, maybe I'll take this part of the video out just where we're talking about Solzhenitsyn and great and put it in a different video at some point, but they've got to get this into their heads that this is no game. These people have a playbook and a past record. I mean, we can
go into that if you want.
If a rapist was released from prison, would you be delighted that he started dating your daughter? That's what we're dealing with.
It's exactly the same thing, yeah. And it's been going on. I mean, you know that the march through the long march through the institutions. What was his name? I can't remember his name now. The guy who first came out with it, but that was to represent the Chinese that actually had a long march to a communist march. But what they've done, and this is the way they can get away with it now. So I've been saying to people for a long time, people seem to think that history's ended. We're not in history anymore. And I said, well, just because we've got a nice society here, a lovely society, all you get is people bringing it down and bringing it down. Oh, so you shouldn't stop doing that because it can go. You think this society is that strong? It isn't. It can go like that. And for the last few years, have you not heard people saying, "Oh, they're this, it's the patriarchy, it's this, it's that"? So you don't like society. Look at other ones because this is the best thing you're ever going to get. We're the best it's ever existed, and they've infiltrated every aspect of society. The Great March through the institutions, through every single institution, like the police, education, particularly. I think they started teacher training in the 50s so that they could infiltrate it with this. You know that common purpose, which is that's a powerful training force for leaders. So now that every single, and the media massively so, every single institution is absolutely rife with this. And I think it's all, and they've tried to introduce this very thing that's happening now, time and time again over the years with Neil Ferguson's. First we had AIDS, and then we had the foot and mouth in 2001, where we slaughtered hundreds of thousands. Then we had the bird flu, where it was supposed to be 200 million people were supposed to have died, and I think it was like 147 or something like that. Then swine flu, the same thing. And they've tried to introduce it time and time again, exactly this thing. And now they've got to the point where they've managed to flood society and break down society so much that we're willing to finally accept it. Because it's just the same thing they've done time and time again. And that's why we're in this mess.
Yeah, I mean, people, like you said, that's a very good point you said about people think history has ended like last week. Look what happened in Russia. That was the Imperial Russian Empire. That was a world power, a legacy of Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, and it was the largest nation on earth. And then this creature called Lenin arrives in a train at the Finland station, and it's gone within a few months.
Yeah. And people will. It just goes to show now. We can see how people accept it. the majority of the people will just accept it. They'll be told that this is the ideology. It makes sense, and they come at you with love, as they say in the in the Godfather. How will they get you? They'll come at you with love, and that's what they do. It's always virtuism, and oh, you got to. It's like the whole global warming thing. You know,
Yeah.
it's the most evil thing, but they come at you with love.
Planet. Yeah. And like, you know, it's amazing how you have a movement in America like Black Lives Matter. If you were to, you know, like, yeah, there has been horrible injustices against African Americans. All you have to do is look at the Jim Crow laws up until the 60s. But at the same time, too, if you were to take African Americans and put them into their own country, they'd be one of the richest nations on earth, in the top 6 or 7, I believe. Now, that's never spoken about. But another thing that's never spoken about with the Black Lives Matter is Native Americans. Native Americans are basically the forgotten genocide, because they're just forgotten about. So you'll have Americans going on about, like, you know, I support Black Lives Matter, whether the Native First Nations people, the Native American people, they're dying at a colossal rate right now because of health issues that are a direct result of conquest and genocide and betrayal and stuff like that. That's America's real dark curse. But it's very easy to ignore that. They love doing that. Like with the global warming thing, it's like, ignore pollution. Look, it's really carbon dioxide. They love hiding the real injustice and then giving you something that's on the surface looks like it can be solved, but it's really just a scam to manipulate whoever they're exploiting in order to get it.
Because it's just another way of introducing it, isn't it? It's nothing to do with what they're saying. It's another way to, all they want to do is collapse society. It's all about collapsing society so they can introduce something which is going to be a lot more fair. Like, you won't have, do people ask themselves, if we are not going to own anything, who is going to own it?
Yeah.
You know, they don't seem to go that little step further, do they?
Yeah,
and what will we have to pay?
Mao Zedong, Chinese living on a bowl of rice a day, and yet he had a collection of sports cars.
Yeah. If somebody takes my house off me and somebody else, well, who's going to own it? Somebody will have to own it. So it's like the state will own everything, so the rich will become richer and the poor will become more controlled through an ideology which says it's going to do the opposite. And it's always the way.
Big Brother never has any problems. Yep, that's really what it is. And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting how, but that Dr. Zhivago, watch that. It's a very soft but very good way of coming to terms with what we're facing.
You could talk about it forever, couldn't you, and all this subject? But we've already done our hour, and we haven't even got into Megaliths yet.
Yeah, so we were going to talk about some of the alignment things. I think we'll give that a skip for next time, because that's a huge subject and we can get carried away. Maybe just you would talk about the tour that we're doing at Ibu.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Because we're so the tour. So it's the Megaliths Mysteries Project tour, and so we finally got we've ironed it out now, and reduced it down a little bit, because we don't know what the next few months are going to be like. So it's going to run for 8 days, and it's going to be from the 20th of September. The hotel rooms are booked. I booked a lovely place in Keswick, and it's going to start in Preston in Lancashire. So to get to Preston is the simplest thing. It wouldn't matter where you are. If you're in the UK, you just get a train to Preston station. It's on the main line from London to Glasgow, and it's not far from Manchester. If you want to fly into Manchester, jump on a train from the airport straight to Preston. It's an hour. It's a very easy place to get to. We can sort you out with any sort of problems you've got. Do you want me to go through the places that we're going to visit, or shall I just leave the? We have to talk
about it, but it's good that you mentioned Keswick, because that's like one of the most beautiful places in England. It's picturesque.
So it's wonderful, isn't it?
Some pictures up there with the mountains, and this time of year, it's beautiful, the snow on the mountains and everything. But you've thrown in something else I saw there as a side trip, a beautiful boat trip on the lake.
Yeah, there's a ferry that goes. The there's one or two little ancient towns in the Lake District. One of them's Keswick, where we're staying. That's on Derwent Water. But the biggest lake is Windermere, and there's a little town called Ambleside, which is at the top of the lake, and halfway down the lake there's Bowness. So we can. So I thought what we'd do is we'll have a bit of time in both towns. Well, yeah, both towns, and then I'll take you down to the ferry. Then you can get on the ferry and you can go down to take the trip down to Bowness, and I'll meet you with the minibus at the bottom to collect you. So yeah, beautiful trip that is, an absolutely beautiful place, and the trip down there. I just thought you have to do it because then you get to see the real Lake District.
Yeah, and Keswick is a town full of lots of little shops, bookshops, cafes, pubs. You'd never go bored there. It's just like
No.
it's you could just the play. If you like exploring traditional towns, it's perfect.
Yeah, and it's right on the banks. We'll have a free day there as well, so that you can explore the town and wander down to Derwent Water, and even take a boat out yourself, a little rowing boat around the island. So that's a wonderful thing to do. But
Go
as
looking
far
for
as
hagstones.
sorry,
The shores around the hagstones, the stones with the holes in them. They can do little things like that there too.
oh yeah, well there's so many different sites. So we're going to do from massive stone circles to the smaller ones to castles. Lots of few different castles. We've got the the statues at Dakar, which are just like really strange. Shap Abbey, a whole load of stuff. But it's all on my. What I've done, I've put a page on the website on my website for the time being. I think maybe you'll put it on yours. I don't know.
Oh,
And
do I
what?
will.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to it down the bottom beneath this video, so you just click on it and go straight over there. What we decided to do for numbers is we weren't sure really how to do it. So I thought we'd start off just using my small minibus, which means there will only be 6 places. It doesn't sound many at all, does it? But if that was, we'll see how we go. If more people want to go, then we can hire a bigger minibus, maybe, and then get another 10 people or something like that. We'll just play it by ear, I thought, really.
And there'll
And
be lots of laugh and banter and interesting conversation all through where going from place to place, and you'll have both of us to talk the ears off you and have a chat
mm,
and stuff like that. So you'll definitely have something to keep you occupied the whole time
and in
and learn
the
and a lot of fun.
a lot of fun, yeah, and a few drinks in the evening, and banter over the meal in the evening, and yeah, it's going to be. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I just can't wait to get back on the road. Really,
It's the ideal trip to sort of reconquer yourself at the end of this lockdown.
oh, absolutely, yeah. So all our hopefully well, don't know. We'll carry on our Megaliths Mysteries project, and then have the tour.
Definitely looking forward to it. So this video is up on your channel,
Yeah,
and so don't forget everybody to subscribe to both playlists on both channels so you don't miss anything.
yeah.
Hit
Please subscribe.
the talks are getting great reviews everywhere. People are loving the Casablanca and this added thing of the movie that we put in. And we didn't do any megaliths this week, but we'll make up for another
Do that
another.
next week. Yeah.
It's because of bandwidth and how long it takes to load the video up and everything. We can't like talk about everything in one go. And plus, we're building an archive here. So thanks again, Neil, and
Yeah.
I will see you next time and everyone else here. In the meantime, I've got a big announcement coming through of a film I'm making. That's like the first sort of like big budget. I won't talk about it. I'll announce it when I'll be back in Facebook in a few days. And although I'm not using Facebook anymore for anything other than placeholders and promotions, I'm on MeWe. MeWe is my main social media now. But look out for that. Find me on MeWe if you want to go there, and that's where I'm having the banter and interesting stuff. And I just don't. I just find Facebook a very toxic environment, like Twitter. But I still want to keep it as a placeholder. And I've also got one more thing. I've got a new blog out. I've released my book, The Anvil of the Psyche, which has been out of print for many years now, and people are looking for €1,000 and stuff for it to buy it on Amazon. Don't give those gangsters money. So it's now free to read online, the text. And so you want to read my book, Anvil of the Psyche, from 2012. It's now free to read online. And I'll see us all next time for episode number double digits.
Back for number 10. Yeah. See you all then. Cheers, everybody. Bye then.